Greetings. First and foremost, right out the gate, I need to give credit where credit is due and note the inspiration for this video, which was this Facebook post by Yashub, which he posted this morning. I was looking at his post and then looking at the sources of his screenshots, and I instantly felt compelled to make this short video. So what Yashub was showing was screenshots from this Reddit post. It was posted to the Reddit group or subreddit, I don't know what you call it, I'm not really on Reddit, but to the Reddit group, which is named 23andMe. It was posted by somebody who uses the screen name JobbyTheHamster. And the post is titled, "I was expecting the 100% British Irish, but my paternal haplogroup is very weird." And it's this young man here who shared his results from 23andMe. And as you see, he got listed as 100% European, more specifically 100% Northwestern European, more specifically 100% British and Irish. But then he showed his haplogroups. And he's right, his paternal haplogroup, I wouldn't call it weird, but it's certainly interesting. His paternal haplogroup is listed as A1B1 or AM118, which is a haplogroup that's largely understood to be restricted to sub-Saharan Africa. However, in the comment section of that Reddit thread, someone shared this article from BBC News. Now, this is an article from 2007, so it's actually quite old, but it's still interesting, and it's titled "Yorkshire Clan Linked to Africa," with the subtitle, "People of African Origin Have Lived in Britain for Centuries, According to Genetic Evidence." So I'd like to read a tiny bit of this. A Leicester University study found that 7 men with a rare Yorkshire surname carry a genetic signature previously found only in people of African origin. The men seem to have shared a common ancestor in the 18th century, but the African DNA lineage they carry may have reached Britain centuries earlier. Details of the study appear in the European Journal of Human Genetics. The scientists declined to disclose the men's surname in order to protect their anonymity. And if I can jump ahead, so we can get straight to the haplogroup, this is what it states. By chance, the researchers discovered a white man with a rare Yorkshire surname carrying a Y-chromosome haplogroup that had previously been found only in West African men. And even there, it is relatively uncommon. We found that he was in haplogroup A1, which is a highly West African specific, said Turi King, a co-author of the study at the University of Leicester. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because that young man who started that thread in Reddit, in that subreddit about 23andMe results, is not the only quote-unquote white person in England to have this haplogroup, right? Now, permit me to explain why I find all this noteworthy. You see, for most haplogroups, the carriers of a particular haplogroup run across a morphological spectrum in terms of hair textures and skin tones. Put more crudely and using clumsy modern racial categories, for most haplogroups, one can say that there are quote-unquote white carriers of that haplogroup and quote-unquote black carriers of that haplogroup, whatever white and black mean, and every shade in between. And of course, most haplogroups of that sort also have carriers with what might be described as stereotypically East Asian morphologies. Now, I personally was not aware of that spectrum existing for haplogroup A. However, for a while now, I've been confident that there are morphologically quote-unquote white A carriers, right? And I was confident that we would come across them eventually, but I didn't have any precise examples to reach for, but at least not before seeing Yashub's post this morning. So I'm glad to now know of precise examples, and I wanted to document such in this video, hence my appreciation for Yashub's post on Facebook, as well as the link to the BBC article, which someone shared in that Reddit thread. As for this young man being described by 23andMe as quote-unquote 100% European, this serves as a lesson about how across enough generations, the autosomes from past ancestors can be effectively obliterated, at least from the perspective of 23andMe. And this has relevance to past discussions about the DNA of Dante Fortson. As I covered in previous videos back in 2021, Dante Fortson has a haplogroup which is downstream from the haplogroups that have been found among the earliest samples from Palestine, the Natufian samples. Now, Dante's haplogroup is EL29, which is downstream from EM34, which some geneticists have proposed originated in the Levant. If those geneticists are right, that would mean that Dante isn't merely related to early Levantine populations. Rather, it would mean that he would be a direct patrilineal descendant of a man who lived in the ancient Levant. Yet, as some noted, when Dante showed his 23andMe results, he apparently didn't get any admixture assigned to the Levant, at least not by 23andMe. So some who were a bit skeptical, raised the question, how can he be a direct patrilineal descendant of a man who lived in the Levant millennia ago if, according to 23andMe, he apparently has effectively no Levantine admixture? And the answer to that question is that Dante's paternal line may have spent so many centuries mixing with women who had no admixture from the Levant that the autosomal traces of his paternal line's Levantine past became negligible to the point of being effectively non-existent, at least from the perspective of 23andMe. To explain this, note, yet again, as has been covered in previous videos, that you have 50% of your father's DNA and 25% of your paternal grandfather's DNA and roughly 13% of his father's DNA, and with each generation, you can wind up having less and less in common autosomally with one of your direct patrilineal ancestors. Within 10 generations, you can wind up with less than 0.1% of distinctive autosomal DNA in common. And by that, I mean, aside from the DNA that all humans have in common. Within 14 to 15 generations, you might have less than 0.1% of the relevant autosomal DNA in common. Now, note that when 23andMe lists DNA and autosomal results, including trace DNA, it seems to be restricting itself to 0.1%. So within 10 to 15 generations, the trace amounts you might have from a paternal ancestor can be, as I said a moment ago, so negligible as to be effectively unrecognized by 23andMe. And we see an example of that with this young man in that Reddit post. He descends paternally from one of the earliest populations in West Africa. It might be said that his paternal ancestors were in West Africa far earlier than were the paternal ancestors of most residents of West Africa today. What I mean by that is that the dominant haplogroup in West Africa today is haplogroup E, but I'm persuaded that the West African E carriers likely descend from a population that was involved in a back migration from Asia back into Africa, which reached the western part of the continent long after the A carriers had already settled there. So this young man might descend from the earliest residents of West Africa, yet 23andMe lists him as effectively 100% European. The easy explanation is that's because through centuries of residing in northwestern Europe and mixing with European women who lacked the relevant African autosomes, his paternal line's traces of that past became so small as to not be picked up by 23andMe. It only shows up in his paternal haplogroup. That's interesting, and I think it's also a testament to the significance and relevance of haplogroups when it comes to tracing uniparental lineages across long periods of time. Food for thought. But with that, I'll close the short video here. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, or objections. So feel free to share your thoughts, no matter what they may be, and God bless.